All right, guys,
government.
let's change the subject. We're gonna offend.
Offend people. Yeah, it's controversial. Is it binding according to halacha to keep the feast days of Vayikra 23 outside the land of Israel?
Leviticus 23 mentions every holiday, for sure. The way we keep it nowadays is in a ceremonial fashion. Although we could be, and really from a halachic and from a Torah perspective, we should be sacrificing the Korban Pesach or offering the Korban Pesach. You don't need a temple to offer the Paschal lamb. And every year, I remember when I was living in Israel, every year there's a rumor that someone's going to go to the Har Bayit and kill a goat or a lamb. Never pans out. It's hard. You can't even pray up there because the Arab cops will arrest you. But that's one thing that we could be doing that people don't do.
Why the mountain Bayit? Where's that mountain?
The Har HaBayit. That means the Temple Mount.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Bayit house. Okay.
Yeah, so it's above the Kotel. Actually, sometimes throw rocks because there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Mosque of Omar there. Every Friday morning, it's like their Shabbos, the Muslim Shabbos. And when they get riled up, sometimes from there, they throw rocks down to the people of the Kotel, and then it falls on people's heads. It's right there. I guess we could throw a rock back, but we don't know we hit some Asian tourists or something.
Can a person who is not halakhically Jewish but follows Torah, can that person put a mezuzah on their home?
Sure, why not? You can keep as many mitzvot in Hilchos Malachim, I believe the 8th or the 10th chapter. It says that you could keep any of the mitzvot if you do them for reward. That means if you do them the way a Jew does it. And you could say the bracha too. Here, first of all, the bracha is rabbinic. It's not like you're breaking some Torah principle by saying Asher Kedushanim Reitzotav Tivanu, that God sanctified us with the commandments and commanded us to do X, Y, and Z. Technically, he did command you to do it, even though you're not halachically Jewish, because you've chosen to be chosen. If you accept the Torah like the Hebrews accepted the Torah on Mount Sinai, you're just as bound to the Torah in God's eyes than a Jew is bound to the Torah. The difference is a halachic Jew is bound to the punishments of the Sanhedrin, which you're not bound to, because it's the court, it's the rabbis who developed the conversion process to be able to run a country, not to decide who is in a covenant with God and who's not in a covenant with God. So everyone hearing me today, if you've accepted the Torah, just like the Hebrews accepted the Torah on Mount Sinai, then you are what the Hebrews became after they said Naaseh v'Nishma, after they decided to walk with God. That's who you are. It's not that you're technically Israel, flesh and blood, but you're in a covenant with God, which is what matters. What matters is that if you're in a covenant with God. I think the reason people are asking this question is because this is what rabbis say. Oh, well, you can't say it because you're not commanded to. God commanded everyone who wanted to be commanded. God commanded anyone who accepted these commandments. That's it. Now, does the Sanhedrin punish you for not keeping one of these laws in some judicial fashion? No, they're not going to adjudicate you because you're legally, on paper, not an Israelite. That's all conversion secures for you. But every one of you, if you believe the Torah is true and you've accepted the Torah upon yourself, is bound by Torah. And the Rambam takes it further, like in Hilchos Mamrim, he says that anyone who believes that the Torah is true is also bound to rabbinic laws as well, in God's eyes, because God tells us not to stray from the right or to the left of what this court instructs us. And then he says that by disobeying them, you're disobeying God. That is what you're bound to. Now, part of the Torah itself is joining Israel. That we have a mitzvah of Yeshivat Yisrael to establish Israel. And that's something you can't do up in the hills of Montana or something if you don't have a community. So that's what you should be moving toward. But only because you can't keep all the mitzvot as well as others doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to keep as much as you can to the best of your ability.
We have someone out in the outside chat. Would I have to buy a kosher Torah, a kosher scroll for a mezuzah, or could I write the scroll for myself, by myself?
Well, like I said, if you feel bound to Torah laws, you should also feel bound to rabbinic laws. And there's a law that a mezuzah can't be written or printed out from your computer. It has to be written on a piece of cloth, like in a piece of parchment. And there's a way it's written. Now, you could write your own mezuzah. I'm not of the opinion that we need a scribe, that you need a sofer stam to do everything. I mean, you can make your own tefillin if you know what you're doing. Writing a mezuzah is probably the first thing that sofer make to practice. So, I mean, you could also order a piece of parchment online and write your own if you wanted to. It'll be much easier to just purchase one. I mean, you could buy one for $50 on eBay.
Mezuzah basically just has the Shema in there, right? The first part of the Shema.
I don't know. I'm not so for
Yeah.
So the mezuzah is not the case. I mean, the mezuzah is just technically.
Mezuzah just means doorpost, right?
Right. So mezuzah just means door frame, or doorpost. Nowadays, people think, they focus too much on the case.
Does it have to have a shin showing out?
No. It's actually a pagan custom to have a shin, even though the Rambam mentions it. And that if you want to have a shin, fine, because it's supposed to be like to protect your house or something like that, but it's not a law. It's hard to find a mezuzah that doesn't.
We have a question about GMO. Is GMO kosher, the concept of genetically modified foods?
Sure, like as long as you don't crossbreed. The understanding is that, yes, there's a prohibition in crossbreeding, but that doesn't mean that as long as you didn't crossbreed, that doesn't mean that you're prohibited from eating that food. Nowadays, almost all food has been genetically modified to some extent. That doesn't mean necessarily that it's going against any Torah principle, but if it is, and you didn't do it, you could still eat it. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
Have a inspection for insects and stuff.
Well, that's lettuce and stuff, right? No, that's sure, of course.
Yeah,
you should always check for insects. Yeah, absolutely.
So you need the kosher label for a GMO to be kosher.
Well, is it all fruit right out of the bat kosher to begin with?
Wait, hold on.
For fruit, do you?
Yeah, but GMO has nothing to do with what's called bodek vegetables. One reason they genetically modify food is to make it less appealing to certain parasites and insects. But vegetables don't need a hechsher. Now, for example, things like broccoli. Some rabbis say that it's almost impossible to find a kosher head of broccoli because the way the plant is created, it's easy for bugs to hide in it. Broccoli from the Bodek brand. Vegetables that are sealed and inspected by rabbis and are dipped in some chemical to kill all the bugs or something like that. According to halakha, first of all, nowhere in the Talmud doesn't tell you how to wash vegetables. I worked for a mashgiach for a little while, and I actually have a video on how to wash lettuce, but this is on how the OU teaches its mashgichim on how to wash lettuce. But that doesn't mean the Talmud tells you how to wash vegetables, because I'm sure you guys have seen the light board. There's this light board that artists use when trying to trace stuff. So people use it in restaurants to inspect lettuce. But there's no right way or wrong way to do it. In America, kashrut has been industrialized to a certain extent, so everyone almost does the same thing. Not every piece of lettuce is inspected. They inspect a bulk of it, rove, and then the rest they consider kosher by just rinsing. But there's no right way and wrong way to do it, as long as you get rid of the bugs. Now the question is, to what extent? Bugs that you could see with the naked eye, or does it have to be a magnifying glass? So according to the rabbis of the Talmud, it's really just with your naked eye, because if you take anything on a microscope, you're going to see stuff that you don't see with your naked eye.
I was just going to say that, sure. I mean, everything. I mean, you're breathing in microbes constantly. I mean, you're inhaling, you're ingesting. It's when you sleep at night. I mean, I don't want to scare anybody, but I hate to tell you guys, but you're probably breathing in bugs when you sleep in and whatever. I mean, it is what it is. It's OCD a little bit. You drive yourself crazy if that's the case. Let's see. We have someone out here, New York, NYS something vet. He says, Rabbi Asher, what are your thoughts on the Art Scroll Ashkenaz Siddur? And is this the Siddur used as claimed in most Orthodox shuls?
For sure, it's the most used Siddur. Before Art Scroll, it was the Birnbaum. But Art Scroll is the standard nowadays. As a matter of fact, Art Scroll just came out with the Edot HaMizrach Siddur, which is a Sephardi Siddur, which is new. Art Scroll had a Siddur that was Sepharad, but Sepharad is not Sephardi. Sepharad, or Sfard, is the Nusach that Hasidim use, with the exception of Chabad, who have their own Nusach Ari, which is really just Nusach Sfard, so more in alignment with the Ari, while Nusach Sfard is the Ari mixed with Ashkenazi customs. But they just came out with an actual Sephardi Siddur, which is nowadays is considered Edot HaMizrach. Edot HaMizrach was just made up by Rav Avada Yosef to combine all different Middle Eastern and non-Ashkenazi customs into one. So Israelis who weren't Hasidic or Litvak or Yekes could have something to unite on, but that's not an actual Nusach. But that's what's considered Sephardi today. So in Ashkenazi synagogues, yes, Art Scroll is a standard. In some places, like you'll find Koran and you'll find Metsuda, but art scroll is what most people use. In some synagogues that are more modern, you'll see the black art scrolls. So the black art scrolls, the difference between the black and the brown is that the black has the prayer for the state of Israel, while the brown does not have the prayer for the state of Israel. Not all synagogues say the Tefillah Medina every Shabbat, only the Zionist ones. So I would say that probably in synagogues you'll find more black Siddurim than the brown Siddurim. But the pocket ones that most converts and Balchuvas buy, like the little small one, doesn't have it. Like doesn't have the prayer for the state of Israel. That's really the only difference.
So we have a question out here. Paula wants to know: what about Goyish holidays like the 4th of July, American Independence Day? Is it allowed by Torah to celebrate?
Sure. The Rav Soloveitchik, was known for always celebrating Thanksgiving. He always went to his sister's house to celebrate Thanksgiving. There's nothing wrong with celebrating the 4th of July. It's not tied to any form of idolatry. Like, why would it be prohibited? That's like a Jehovah's Witness thing, that they don't salute the flag. They don't celebrate any holidays because it seems like
birthdays. They're not taking the birthdays.
Right. They say, what are the two only birthdays celebrated in the Bible? So their Bible is the Old and the New, right? So they say that it was Pharaoh, and when he killed all the kids, but he wanted people to mourn, and John the Baptist when he had his head chopped off.
Oh, that's definitely a day I would celebrate.
Well, there you go.
Sorry, bad humor. Okay, Jacob wants to follow up. Jacob wants to follow up to the Siddur question. He says that was a great question, by the way. Who asked that? He has a question about what is the most authentic Siddur, and what was the first Siddur ever printed?
So the oldest one we have now is a Siddur of Rav Chai Gaon. We're talking about the times of the Gaonim. I don't think that in the times of the Talmud there was a Siddur. People pretty much improvised. I believe that regarding the Amidah, I think the first two brachot and the last two brachot are set in stone, and then people are meant to improvise. Things like Kaddish, the text of the Kaddish is from Gaonic times. It's not mentioned in the Talmud. Rav Sadagon also has a Siddur. The Siddur that I have on my website, that we have translated in many different languages, we only kept what the Rambam and Rav Sadagon had in common in the Siddur. With Siddurim are not set in stone. The bulk of what we pray nowadays is not even mandatory. As long as you pray the Amidah, and again, a lot of that could be improvised as long as the main brachot are there. Same thing with Birkat Hamazon. Prayer is very short. You walk into a synagogue and they have to run through it because it's so long. It's not even enjoyable anymore. You don't even know what they're saying. Even if you know Hebrew, because they're saying it so fast. But they think that more is more instead of less is more. And it makes them seem more sophisticated if they're able to, say 500 words a minute. Also, even the Parsha in Mishnaic times, the Parsha was split up into 3 years, not 1 year. So people were actually able to study a reasonable amount of the Parsha every week instead of having to compress such a long Parsha every week just to be done every year, because Simchas Torah is a new holiday. It's something really made up by Ashkenazim. And in the Talmud, people didn't celebrate Simchas Torah because they didn't read the Torah every year. They read it every 3 years. And every community didn't read the same Parsha every week. People just sort of improvised. There's a huge dumbification of the Jewish world, and they think like what people are doing nowadays is what they always did. They had art scroll Siddurim back then, and they had the Haftarot already laid down for you to read. Back then, it was all improvised. It gave you freedom in your walk with God. Perhaps you don't want to read Parshas Korach this week. You want to read Parshas Shlach. Everything has been dumbified. You can't even insert your own personal prayers to God. There's a section in our prayer called Tachanun. It was also known as Nefilat HaPayim, where people are supposed to input their own personal supplications to God. That's what Tachanun means. Tachanunim means supplications. Even that, the rabbis will later on down the road told you what you should say in the area that you're supposed to talk to God one-on-one. And no one mentions these things. I'm curious. But with as much as people call me a liar and this and that, has anyone challenged anything I've brought to the table?